Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
People think that like they shouldn't ask kind of like quote like nosy or intrusive questions because they feel like they're going to be quote nosy or intrusive, but actually others, it's like we all kind of want to like to talk about ourselves, so like we should ask questions that are more deep.
Are you a teen or adult looking for more happiness in every day and ways to connect with people in your life?
You've come to the right place. Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
And we're the two teens behind Small Bits of Happiness.
We're interviewing Olympic athletes, entrepreneurs, celebrities, and more.
Throughout all of our episodes, you'll find great conversations, hacks that you can take away and try in your life, inspiration, as well as unique and surprising insights. Today, we are speaking with Sonja Lyubomirsky.
And it wasn't really until the first year of college where I took a psychology class that I kind of fell in love.
Welcome, Sonja Lyubomirsky.
Sonja Lyubomirsky.
Dr. Sonja Lyubomirsky is one of the leading figures in the science of happiness.
Sonja is a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California, Riverside.
How much of our happiness would you say is actually within our own control?
There's really like three buckets of like influences on happiness.
What are your top tips for teens to be able to take control of their happiness?
Like what is it you can do? And I should mention that
What is the most outstanding fact about happiness?
we underestimate how rewarding things are.
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness. Welcome, Sonja.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. You are an iconic psychologist and author, but take us back to the beginning. What were you like as a teen, and were you interested in psychology?
Good question. No, actually, I was interested in kind of, quote, the hard sciences like chemistry and biology. And it wasn't really until the first year of college where I took a psychology class that I kind of fell in love with psychology. I realized that, or for me, that people were more interesting to me than like atoms or molecules. So
That's so cool. I think that's something that a lot of teens don't realize.
Yeah.
Is like you might not even know your true interest or passion until you try something new.
Exactly, kind of doing like I don't know if I'm gonna like this, but I'm gonna try it, and if I don't like it, that's okay. I'm just learning more about myself.
totally. And in fact, I remember going on like a college trip with my kids where like, so these are all like seniors in high school, juniors in high school, and they're all being asked like, what do you want to major in? And every single person had this very confident answer, actually, except for my kids. And they were like, I don't know. And I'm like, no one knows. Like, it's like there's a very low correlation with what you think you want to do, you know, in high school than what you're going to do later. So yeah, I would say like, don't worry about that. Like you might find your passion later in life.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that so much.
Yeah, exactly. Throughout your entire journey, what do you think your most significant challenge has been, and how did you overcome this?
We just want to quickly say, check out our happiness wellness products designed by us for individuals of all ages to help you bring a small bit of happiness to your home with our tangible tips and tools. Check them out in the show notes.
I guess at the beginning, so I started studying happiness in graduate school, actually. So it was right after I finished college. I was 22 years old. And that was really challenging because back then, so that was a long time ago, that was like 35 years ago, there was only really one person, like one scientist, his name is Ed Diener, who was studying happiness. And he didn't even call it happiness, he called it subjective well-being, because he didn't think he could like, you know, have a successful career studying something like so fuzzy, and like it seemed very fuzzy and unscientific. So when I first started, I was really pretty insecure about the research, just thinking like, I don't know, like what is happiness and how do you measure it? I mean, of course, fast forward, you know, decades later, and now like there's a lot of interest in it, in all, not just in psychology, in neuroscience and economics, like across a variety of fields. But that was challenging at first, like to sort of, I guess, convince myself and other people that this is like a scientific, a valid scientific endeavor, that we could study happiness rigorously.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's so fascinating how kind of, I guess, new you could even say
Yeah.
happiness is, because I think there's constantly so much research being done on it. But the fact that like even 30 years ago, our understanding of science, of happiness has changed so much is so fascinating to me because as teens, we often feel as though we have so little control over our own lives. We want to be like an adult and make decisions for ourselves, but we still have to listen to the adults within our lives, at least to some degree. So how much of our happiness, as you are a leading expert around the world in happiness, how much of our happiness would you say is actually within our own control?
Well, I guess a couple of answers to that question. So first of all, just having a sense of control is really, really important. And in fact, when we did, one of my students did a study where we kind of looked at like all the different factors that influence happiness, and like having a sense that you have at least some parts of your life under your control, have some sense of autonomy or agency is really, really important to happiness. And so even, and it's interesting, like even people like, even like when you're a teenager, you have a family, you're answering to like parents, teachers, or even people like, here's an extreme example, like you're in prison, you don't have much control over your days, but like even in those situations, there's some little part of your day or life that you can take control over. You know what I mean? Like whether it's how much exercise you do, or what you eat. In fact, I have to say eating disorders, apparently one of the kind of contributors to eating disorders is that, young women often like feel like they don't have control. So like they start over controlling their bodies, right? So that's like a negative effect of that. But like, control over, I don't know, like, who your friends are, or like whatever, how you spend some of your time. So first of all, that's really, really important. In terms of happiness, a great deal of happiness is under control. Like there's really like 3 buckets of like influences on happiness. And the first one is genetics. And it's sort of unfortunate, but like genetics influence everything, like every human trait, like, what you look like, obviously, like how conscientious you are, what your blood pressure is like everything is a genetic influence. We just have to accept that. It doesn't mean that we're fated to have X or Y, but there's an influence. So like, you look around you, some of your friends, your family members are a lot happier than others. And that there's a sort of quote, like born that way. But it doesn't mean that they're fated to sort of have that level of happiness. The second is your life circumstances, right? If you have like really wonderful friends, whether like, or versus not like that many friends, or you're in a bad romantic relationship, that's hurting you, right? Versus a good relationship, whether you're poor or like comfortable or wealthy, like that is going to influence your happiness, whether you live in a neighborhood that's safe or not, right? So that is going to influence your happiness. But then like the other third bucket is like what you can do and how you can think. And so one thing I remember from being a teenager is feeling like I don't have control, like feeling like I have these problems and like there's nothing I can do about them. And I see that in my kids too. They're just like, there's nothing I can do. And I'm like, no, there's things you can do. And so I think that's like the biggest lesson of happiness research for young people especially is that absolutely there are things you can do, but it's not easy. Just like if you wanted to like get more fit, right? You'd have to like exercise like every day or like several times a week for the rest of your life, right? Like for many, many months or years. It's not easy. And so it's kind of like mental exercise, like how you think about yourself, how you think about other people in your life, how you think about the world, how grateful you are, like how much social interactions you have. All of that influences your happiness, and you have control over that.
I think that it's so almost empowering and hard at the same time because you really do need to take accountability and say, I know that I actually do have control over this and I need to step up. But at the same time, it's empowering because it's like, I do have control. I can choose if I can feel happier or not by, changing the way I view situations, by saying instead of I have to work out, I get to work out, I'm going to do this, and just kind of almost shifting our way of thinking can definitely be so beneficial.
I also think it's so fascinating because like you said, like sometimes our relationships or our, social status, it all influences our happiness, and some of that is environmental and we can't control it. But also like to some degree you can control your relationship. So finding the things that you can control, like if you find that you feel really drained by a certain friend, maybe kind of backing off from that relationship.
But if you feel like you're having a really great connection with someone, spending more time with them.
Exactly, and connection is really the key to, and I'll kind of jump to the end, like the key to happiness is connection. Anything that helps you connect more with others. By the way, by others, it's usually other people, like friends and family, but it could be strangers, right? It could be like chatting with the barista at the coffee shop. It could be your pet. It could be God, if you're religious. So it could be like, or like even like what are called parasocial relationships, like celebrities. Connection is really critical. But you're right, like there's certain things you can't really control, so you have to sort of think about what is it you can control. One exercise I do with my class, in my college class that I teach, I teach a class called the Science of Happiness, Science of Well-Being, is I have them for 4 days, keep kind of like, you can do this on an app or you can do this on a piece of paper, like keep track of like how they're thinking and feeling like 4 times a day. So you can do this for the next 4 days, like 4 times a day, like at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., around like 6 p.m., 10 p.m., like check off, like rate, like are you like engaged, are you bored, are you anxious, are you connected, like various like sort of ways of feeling and thinking, and then like note who are you with, what are you doing. And people have all these realizations. They're like, oh my God, like it turns out I'm actually like kind of bored when I'm like at home, after like I'm actually more engaged in school than I'm at home, or like I really am never happy when I'm with that person, like Mercedes you mentioned, like that friend drains you. So, but sometimes we don't realize it. So like doing that kind of exercise, kind of like self-experimenting, and then trying to change the things that you can change.
Oh, I love that, because I think sometimes we just go on in our days and we're in our routines and we're in our habits and we don't realize what is giving us happiness and what is taking our happiness from us that we could potentially control or change. And so I think that, writing down how we feel and really kind of taking advantage of, the routine and recognizing what part of our day we should do more of and what we should try to reduce is powerful.
And then even that control itself and knowing that you can control those factors will give you a little bit more happiness too. So what are your top tips for teens to be able to take control of their happiness?
Sure. So that's kind of like, getting to the heart of the matter, right? Like, what is it you do? And I should mention that these are going to be a little different for each person. So I never want to say like everyone should do X. And there are some books that kind of say that and or videos or whatever. But I think it's going to be personalized. Again, connection being kind of the key. And so we do research where we find, for example, like doing acts of kindness for others makes people happy. So, and that could be like little things, it could be big things, it could be medium things, making someone smile, giving a compliment, like it depends on like what you're comfortable with. And that's like, it's such a small thing that can really, make you feel better. Anything, like if you're feeling kind of down about yourself or stressed out, anything that takes the focus off of you and onto like another person or a hobby or like another thing, an activity. And so like just some examples, like I'll give compliments. Like I'll be at like the grocery store and I'll say, obviously they have to be heartfelt. They have to be authentic. And so like, let's say the cashier is like really fast and efficient and I'm in a hurry and I'm like, thank you so much. Like you are so good at your job. And people look at me like I'm like, they've never received a compliment like that, right? Because people are they just rush off. So that's like a little tiny act of kindness, right? Or whatever, it could be anything. So that's one way to connect. But really any social interaction tends to increase people's mood, a conversation. Now, some people are shy, right? So it could be uncomfortable. And then some social interactions are, let's face it, like could be aversive or negative, right? So, but it's just that on average, talking to people, like conversation makes people happy. So we did a study, we actually, or others have done studies where they've had people just do a Zoom conversation with a stranger for 25 minutes, which seems like why, like I'm an extrovert and I don't really want to have a conversation on Zoom with a stranger for 25 minutes. And yet on average, people felt like so much happier after that conversation than before. So like talking to people, like interacting is really, really important. And then I want to talk about gratitude a little bit. That's another one of the top tips. It seems sometimes like so hokey and trite and people are always talking about gratitude, but it's so powerful, right? Just like focusing on what we have and like really authentically, genuinely feeling grateful for it, as opposed to like just only focusing on what we don't have or what we want, right? Like, because human beings, like we always want more, right? Like that's how we succeed and progress and advance, like as a species, right? We're never quite satisfied. We always want more. When we reach one goal, we want more. So that's kind of healthy in some ways, but we also want to stop and like be grateful for the things that we have achieved or the things that we have.
I love all of your tips because I think that they're so, like what I love about them is they're so tangible. Like you don't need to be a multimillionaire to do them. You don't need to be, have it all figured out and, be living on your own and feel super independent. Like you can do it every day. You can start today. Like there's no build up or anything. And so to one point about connection. I think that's so true. Like that's why I think during the pandemic people struggled so much. It was harder to connect. It was harder to go to the grocery store, have a little hangout with your friends. And so I think for people who are like introverted or who don't really like to connect with others, like even just having that small compliment or smiling at somebody, not even striking up a huge conversation, or connecting with the people who you're comfortable with, like a family member, like that all counts. And I love that.
Yeah, and I do want to stress that, because whether you're an introvert or extrovert, everyone needs to connect. It's a universal human need. Makes everyone happy. It's just that how you do it is going to be different, right? So for some people, it could be like reaching out to like just one friend. In fact, there's a bunch of studies that show that we underestimate the impact of these things. Like we think of like someone maybe someone you went to school with before, like you haven't reached out in a while. We think, oh, I don't know if they want to hear from me. It's been so long. And it turns out people love to hear from old friends. Like, again, not all the time, not 100% of the time, but let's say most of the time, on average. So we kind of underestimate like how rewarding some of these behaviors might be, even like little things. So choose what like feels comfortable for you. There's 3 kind of like questions that I have people ask themselves. Is this enjoyable? Does this feel natural? And is it meaningful, right? So do what is enjoyable, natural, and meaningful, although those can change over time, right? So some habits at first might not feel natural, but you might it might feel more natural the more you do it.
Exactly, just kind of the habit of like repetition and just becoming more and more comfortable. And I feel like oftentimes, especially when speaking to strangers, there can be so much social anxiety, being like, what if they take this the wrong way? But the way I see it is, if you're going out of your way to compliment someone or to tell them they're doing a great job, most of the time they're not going to be on the receiving end feeling like, I can't believe they just said that to me, and then taking it in a negative manner, because it's a compliment. It's supposed to make you feel better. It's supposed to uplift you. And so I think just kind of having that kind of reassurance, like it's a compliment. It's not going to make them upset.
Exactly. Let's say 90% of the time it's going to be positive. So just do it. And what's the worst thing to happen, right? Like it's not going to be so bad. Another thing I want to mention is when you're having a conversation with someone, the importance of listening. I mean, we all kind of know like we need to listen, but like real listening, which comes from curiosity, right? Like where you really try to find something that is authentically interesting to you about another person's story or what they're telling you is really, really important, and asking questions. And so this is something that I've actually been writing about with a co-author. The importance of asking questions. It turns out when you think about the last time you, I don't know, went to a party or like just were hanging out with friends, like how often do people ask you like real questions about yourself? Not just like, how are you? Like, or how did that test go? But just like real questions. And like, we all kind of want to feel understood and like valued. We want people to sort of care about us and ask us real questions. And we're afraid that like, of asking questions because we'll be perceived as being kind of too nosy or something, or too intrusive. Obviously, you don't want to ask things that are like, way too personal. But we all kind of want others, like to feel like others really care about what's going on like inside of us. So that's another piece of advice, I guess, is to like go deeper in conversations and like ask deeper questions.
For sure. I think that questions definitely, like I think asking questions and actually thinking like, how deep is this more of like a surface level question, or will they actually connect to this?
Yeah, connecting it to what they've said previously by genuinely listening to them.
Exactly. I think that's so important.
Exactly. And then having insight about it. So like I have my best friend actually lives in Spain, so we leave each other like voice memos because that's like the easiest way to connect because of the time difference. And so she'll like tell me something, and then or I'll tell her something, and then she'll ask me all these questions, and then she'll have an insight. Like I know she's listening because she's having an insight about it. She's like, remember when, as you said, like that happened before. Like here's a pattern that I'm seeing, right, that you're doing, right? Or again, like asking questions, not just like what happened next, but like how did you feel like when that happened? I mean, it feels a little bit like a therapist, but really we want our friends in some ways to be a little bit like therapists, like how did it make you feel when that happened, like when that person said that to you, and then like really like what is your internal life like? We want to feel like people care about our internal life.
Absolutely. And I think that when someone genuinely like cares and asks how we're feeling, it just seems like they actually are, they want to listen and they want to hear more, and we love to share and like build that trust with someone. So being a caring person and like initiating caring conversations, I think is a great way to kind of feel that sense of purpose and like drive yourself forward in a relationship.
Exactly. And you are so experienced in this research of happiness because you've been researching this for over 30 years. And what is the most outstanding fact about happiness that you have come across?
That's a fact about happiness. So I'm not sure, so what do you mean by outstanding? You mean that people don't know about, or the most interesting or the most surprising?
Maybe one that you've just found, when you came across it, was just really fascinating to you.
Yeah. Well, actually, really, a couple things. One is what I was just saying about how people, and it was a study actually that was published that showed that people think that they shouldn't ask kind of quote nosy or intrusive questions because they feel like they're going to be quote nosy or intrusive, but actually others, it's we all kind of want to to talk about ourselves, so we should ask questions that are more deep than we think we are asking, and I guess the studies that's kind of show that it's called we underestimate how rewarding things are. So even I was surprised about this. When you express gratitude to someone, we kind of know that people like to receive gratitude, or when we do an act of kindness for someone, but we still feel kind of awkward doing it, and we don't realize how well they're going to be received. So this is called a miscalibration. We're sort of miscalibrated in how people are going to respond to us. So basically do more, do more of all of these things. Ask more questions, express gratitude more, do more acts of kindness, talk more to others, even if it's sort of uncomfortable at first. So I guess that's sort of what's interesting to me is findings that show that people, here's another one. People think, this is kind of funny, in conversation, people think that the other person wants to stop the conversation sooner than they actually do. And so we're talking to someone and we're thinking oh, they might be kind of bored already. But it turns out everyone is thinking that the other person wants to stop, but actually they don't want to stop. Again, on average, obviously there are times when it's true they really want to stop. But on average, people want to stop conversations. They want to kind of continue longer than you think they do. Isn't that interesting? So we have all these false beliefs, so kind of myths. So that's kind of important to correct.
I love that because, again, just like I just said earlier on, it gives you this sense of kind of empowerment where it's if you feel awkward in a conversation and you're maybe I shouldn't keep going, keep talking, especially if the person genuinely seems don't try to interpret how they're feeling. If they are giving you positive cues and they're talking and they don't seem to be super frustrated, it's not a bad thing to keep going. You're not going to be deemed annoying. And also what's the worst that will happen? Maybe you'll create in the best case scenario, you'll create a great connection. Maybe you'll create a better friendship or a better relationship. And the worst case scenario, someone's a bit frustrated and then not to do that with them again. But I think there's just so much that we kind of try, especially as teenagers, we're so awkward. Yeah. We don't want to push the people's boundaries and we don't want people to think we're annoying or weird or strange or anything like that. But realistically, knowing that we might be a little bit oversensitive and overcautious sometimes, and that is actually potentially hurting our happiness and our relationships. So it's okay to be a bit uncomfortable at first.
Yeah. Actually, maybe I can ask you a question too, because one thing I've noticed in at least some of the teenagers that I know is that they get embarrassed a lot. Embarrassment is an emotion that you guys feel more, I think, more often than older adults do. And it's understandable, there's a purpose to it, because you don't want to make a faux pas, you don't want to do the wrong thing or cross a boundary. But I think it is really a barrier to more connection or to really greater happiness. So if I had a wish, I wish I could kind of reduce the amount of that feeling, that embarrassment in teenagers, so they could take more risks, I guess.
I 100% agree. I think that a lot of teenagers are very, very cautious, and we don't want to embarrass ourselves. Yeah. We don't want
that feeling of, oh shoot, I feel like I did that, but I really wish I didn't.
And I think the big concern is standing out from the crowd and being embarrassed because of that. And I think as you get older, a lot of, even me in the past few years, I mean, I'm 16, obviously I'm still in my mid-teens, but even since I was 13 and 14, I realized I don't care as much as about what this person thinks or dressing the same as everyone, looking the same as everyone. But I think especially as a teenager, we just put a lot of value in validation from other people. And so being able to kind of realize that, hey, I'm interpreting what they think and that might not be 100% accurate, like what you mentioned, is so valuable.
And to add on to that, I think that people aren't really paying attention to us as much as we think they are, because we often like are overanalyzing everything we say, and maybe we said something awkward like yesterday, and then we think that the next time we see our friends laughing, it means that they're bringing it back up again and they're making fun of us when we're not there, and this is going to be their inside joke when we're not there. Whenever we see them laughing, it's about that.
And they're not. And actually, there's a name for it. It's called the spotlight effect, where it's true for adults too, but I think it's probably more with teenagers, where you think, and actually one of the classic studies was like a guy in a party kind of setting, and he spills ketchup on his shirt, and he thinks everyone is staring at him that he has like ketchup all over his shirt, and actually like no one notices. And so it's like that's sort of the spotlight effect. Like we think people are like paying more attention to us and looking at us like more than they are, and like as you said, like remembering things. Another thing I wanted to mention, which is really like something really to take to heart if you're a teenager, is that like things get better. I mean, I think you know this, like you get happier. So the least, when you look at age and happiness, the least happy people are ages 14 to 28. So, and I guess maybe that's a little depressing because 28 is still, I mean, it doesn't have to be 28, but like basically teenagers are like the least happy, it's the least happy age. So it only gets better, right? Because you are, as Mercedes, like you guys said, you care a little bit less and less what other people think, and you need less validation like as you grow older. And of course, as you grow older, you might like find more like what your passion is and your career. You might find like more friends or a romantic partner, you know, like so like things kind of like shape up as you get older too. But also you just sort of care less what people think.
That is definitely reassuring. I think that's
Yes.
good to know for everyone listening. And, you know, it will get better. And so don't give up on finding the happiness in daily life. And as a final question, I want to ask you, as a happiness expert, what do you do every day that brings you a small bit of happiness?
Yeah, great question. I think a few things. First of all, I always exercise. Like that makes me happy. I think moving, right, and that's partly, that was actually in my book, The How of Happiness. I have 12 different like categories of activities to make people happy, and one of them is movement. I practice gratitude really every day, but it's not like a practice like I don't have like a journal or anything like that. It's just that it's kind of woven throughout my day. Like there's like lots of times where I'll just look outside the window and I'm like, oh, like I'm just like happy, you know, I have this place, like I don't know, like. And then the other thing is like I love cuddling. Like a physical touch is my love language for sure. So like I love like touching and cuddling with my kids. I love just cuddling and like. So like that's something that really makes me happy. So, but anyway, yeah, it's different. It's gonna be different for everyone.
I love that. And, you know, just spending time like connecting with your
Yes.
kids, giving them a hug. I think that's such a powerful way to boosting our happiness. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and
Thank
for
you so
sharing
much.
this. You are such an iconic scientist and psychologist. And so we're just so thrilled to be able to speak with you
This
today.
has been so amazing.
Thank you. You guys have amazing questions, and you're so eloquent and articulate. I really like. I have really wishing you the best in the rest of your year, like the rest of your decade. So good luck with everything.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness.
And thank you so much for Sonja for joining us today. Anastasia and I learned so much from her. She's so inspiring, and I just think that, you know, her research is truly making a big impact on our world and how we perceive happiness. Anastasia, what's your biggest takeaway?
I think my biggest takeaway is that connecting with other people is such an amazing way to build happiness. And sometimes that means you have to go a little bit out of your comfort zone, talk to a stranger and compliment them, and most likely than not, they're going to take it in a positive way. So don't be scared of it. And just, you know, connecting with even loved ones and just talking and trying to find points in your life that you can bond with others. What about you, Mercedes?
I love that so much. And one of my biggest takeaways is the fact that it's okay, especially as a teenager, to sometimes feel sad. And remember that you're not always going to feel sad. You're not always going to feel like you have no control within your life. Like Sonja said, statistically, we are not the happiest group. In fact, this is probably the most difficult and sad part of our lives. So look towards the future, look for the happiness in daily life, and just realize that it is going to get better. You just got to keep on going.
If you enjoyed this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out. I would really appreciate it.
Also, be sure to join our happiness family. We'd love to have you. It's totally free, and this way you'll never miss another iconic interview. You can join by following this podcast on whichever podcast listening platform you're on now. See you next time!